My son's voice trembled like a candle in the wind when he leaned close to my ear. "Mommy, Daddy has a lover, and they're planning to take all your money." For a moment, the whole house went silent, as if the walls were listening, waiting for my reaction. I'm a woman who once believed her home was steady, predictable, safe. My husband and I shared a quiet routine: morning tea, school drop-offs, the soft clatter of evenings. Our 7-year-old son, Ali, was the only spark of innocence in a house that had begun to feel too dim. I didn't know that behind closed doors. Whispers were growing like cracks beneath paint. I only understood the truth the night my son came to me with fear in his small eyes, carrying a secret too heavy for him. The night had a stillness that didn't feel natural. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. I remember lying there half asleep when I felt a tiny hand press against my arm. "Mommy?" His voice was thin, almost trembling, like he was afraid the darkness would hear him. I opened my eyes, and in the faint hallway light behind him, my son looked smaller than usual, like the shadows were leaning toward him. He swallowed hard, leaned close to my ear, and whispered the words that pulled the floor out from under me. I sat up, brushing the hair from his forehead. His cheeks were warm, the way they get after a restless sleep. "Ali, sweetheart, what's wrong?" He didn't answer at first. He kept glancing back toward the bedroom door, as if he was afraid someone else might come through it. The house felt different tonight, unusually quiet, like it was waiting for a secret to be spoken. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to slow its turning, letting the silence stretch between us. "I heard Daddy," he finally said, voice barely more than a breath. Something in my chest tightened, but I forced my voice to stay steady, gentle. "What did Daddy say?" Ali lowered his head the way he does when he's scared of saying something wrong. "He was talking on the phone. I think he thought I was asleep." His small fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt. He said something about a lady, and money, and you. I felt the mattress shift as I leaned closer. "And what did he say about me?" He hesitated, then whispered the words so quietly I felt them more than I heard them. "Mommy, Daddy said he has a lover and they're going to take all your money." The room suddenly felt colder, like someone had opened a window I couldn't see. I held him long enough for his breathing to settle. "Ali, come with me," I whispered. We walked down the hallway together, each step soft against the floorboards. The nightlight near the living room flickered, casting a faint glow across the carpet. It was strange how familiar rooms can feel, foreign when you're carrying a truth you never asked for. I sat on the sofa, pulling him into my lap. "Sweetheart, I need you to tell me everything you heard." "Every word." Ali nodded slowly, pressing his cheek to my shoulder. He was talking softly, like he didn't want to wake you. He said she misses him, and he told her that soon they'll have everything. My heart thudded painfully, each beat echoing through my ribs. "Did he say her name?" Ali shook his head. "No, but he said he would come to see her tomorrow. And he said, she won't know anything until the end." Those words landed like cold stones. I ran my fingers through Ali's hair, grounding myself in the warmth of him. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, say he misunderstood, say he dreamed it. But children don't invent whispers in the dark. Not one spoken in adult voices. The house felt like it was holding its breath around us. I stood up slowly, placing Ali on the couch with his blanket. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be right back." I walked toward my bedroom, the place where my husband slept, just a few rooms away. The hallway seemed longer than usual, the air heavier. My hand paused on the doorframe as a wave of dread pressed down on me. Inside, he lay on his side, facing away from the door, breathing steady, peaceful, as if his world held no cracks. For a moment, I just watched him. The rise and fall of his back, the calm on his face, a calm I no longer recognized. I didn't wake him. I didn't say his name. I didn't even step inside. Instead, I listened for the creak in his breathing that might mean guilt. Listened for the shift in the bedsheets that might betray a restless conscience. But there was nothing, just a stillness I suddenly didn't trust. I backed away, leaving the door slightly ajar, just enough to remind myself this house belonged to me too. When I returned to the living room, Ali was sitting upright, staring at the shadows near the staircase. He looked older than 7 in that moment, older than a child should ever look. I sat beside him. "Mommy?" he whispered. "Yes, love? Is Daddy bad?" The question broke something inside me. Closing scene, 1:30 words. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. "No," I whispered softly, though the answer tasted uncertain. "Daddy just made a mistake, and Mommy needs to understand what's happening." Ali rested his head against me, trusting my words even when I didn't fully trust them myself. The night stretched quietly around us. The house felt like it knew something had shifted, as if the walls had absorbed a truth we could no longer ignore. I looked toward the dark hallway where my husband slept, his shape barely visible through the cracked door, and for the first time I felt like I was staring at a stranger. The whisper still echoed in my ear. What other secrets were waiting in the dark? The morning came too quickly. I hadn't slept, not really. I just drifted in and out, listening to every sound the house made. The kettle clicking, the fan humming, footsteps that might have been real or imagined. But what I remember most is the silence. A silence that felt thick enough to touch. When I heard the faint vibration of a phone through the cracked bedroom door, something in my chest tightened again. It wasn't loud, just a soft buzz against wood. But it told me one thing clearly. He was awake and hiding a conversation from me. I moved quietly, careful not to wake Ali, who had finally fallen asleep on the couch, his small body curled beneath the blanket, clutching the corner as if it could protect him from the truth he'd overheard last night. The morning light crept through the curtains in thin lines, soft but cold. It painted the hallway in pale gold as I stepped toward the bedroom. The door was closed now. He always slept with it closed. But I knew he hadn't closed it last night. I had left it slightly open. I pressed my palm flat against the wood. Warm, meaning he'd been standing near it recently. Another vibration, then another. He wasn't answering the call. He was letting it ring in silence, as if he didn't want me to hear his voice or the words he might say. I leaned closer, and for a moment, I saw my reflection in the doorknob, small, blurred, like someone trying to recognize themselves after a storm. I wanted to knock. I wanted to walk inside. I wanted to ask him who was calling at 7:12 in the morning, but I didn't. I just stood there, letting the cold truth press against my skin. I was afraid of the answer. When the ringing stopped, I stepped back. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt him moving inside the room. His feet hit the floor with that familiar heaviness, the sound of someone who never learned how to walk gently. The bed creaked, a drawer opened, fabric rustled. I pretended to walk toward the kitchen, letting my footsteps fall just loud enough to be heard. The door opened behind me. He stepped out barefoot, hair messy from sleep, phone gripped loosely in his hand. He was careful to keep the screen turned away from me. "Morning," he said, voice too casual, too even. I forced a smile. "Morning?" He didn't look at me for more than half a second. His eyes darted to the living room, where Ali slept, and then back to his phone. "Did you sleep?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of what he feared I might know. "A little," I answered. He nodded, almost relieved. "Good. I'm heading out early today." I looked at his clothes. Not his usual work shirt, not his uniform, just something plain, like he dressed quickly. Or for someone who didn't care what he wore. "Work?" I asked softly. He hesitated, a fraction of a second, but enough. "Yeah, work." The lie slipped too easily off his tongue. He walked past me toward the front door, but something made me stop him. Maybe it was the memory of Ali's whisper. Maybe it was the woman's voice I imagined on the other end of the phone. Maybe it was just the weight of being kept in the dark for so long. "Your phone keeps ringing," I said quietly. He paused, hand resting on the doorknob. "Oh, just work stuff." "Who's calling this early?" I asked it softly, without accusation, just a question a wife was allowed to ask. He stiffened. "Clients. You wouldn't know them." Another lie. He never hid client calls. He never turned his screen away from me. I took a breath, felt my voice steady itself. "Let me see, in case it's something important." That was when he turned fully, his expression tightening around the edges. I said, "It's work. Don't start your paranoia again." Paranoia. A word he used when he wanted me to doubt my own instincts. A word he used to make me feel small. "I'm not starting anything," I whispered. "I'm just asking." He glanced toward the hallway, the one that led to our room, as if he needed to check something before leaving. Then his thumb pressed quickly against his phone screen, locking it. He shoved it into his pocket. "I'll be home late." And without waiting for my response, he stepped outside and shut the door behind him. A little harder than necessary, I stood alone in the quiet house, staring at the closed door as if it might open again. It didn't. The morning light shifted, warming the floor, but not the air around me. Something felt hollow, as if a room inside my chest had been emptied without warning. Ali stirred on the couch behind me, rolling over, still asleep. His small hand slipped from under the blanket, open, trusting. I walked to the bedroom door. Slowly, carefully, I touched the doorknob again. This time it was cold. Inside, something waited for me. Answers, maybe. Or the confirmation I feared. I pushed the door open a few inches and felt the stillness inside. What was he hiding so early in the morning? And why did it feel like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face? The house felt different in the quiet, like someone had tilted it just slightly. And everything inside had shifted when I wasn't looking. Most mornings, the sun took its time spilling across the living room floor. But that week, it felt colder, almost hesitant. I would stand there with a cup of tea cooling between my palms, listening for footsteps that no longer matched the man I married. It's strange how betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes, it just breathes differently. I started waking earlier than usual, not because I wanted to, but because my body felt like it had something to warn me about. The air in our bedroom was always heavy in those hours before dawn, and I would watch him move through it like a stranger. He used to kiss Ali before leaving. Now he just checked the clock, checked his phone, checked the mirror, always checking something, always somewhere else. Some mornings he left before the sun could catch his face, as though daylight might reveal more than he wanted it to, and I would lie there pretending to sleep, listening to the rustle of clothes, the spray of a cologne he never wore around me, the soft click of the door closing between us. I didn't ask questions. Questions require trust, and trust requires a foundation that had already begun to crack under my feet. Ali stayed close during those days, watching me with eyes too wise for his age. He didn't ask either, but children feel changes the way birds sense storms. He'd touch my arm when I washed dishes, sit on the bathroom floor while I brushed my hair, sleep with his hand wrapped around my shirt as if afraid it might slip away. And in all that silence, I kept telling myself to breathe, to act normal, to wait, because sometimes the truth reveals itself without being invited. The first time I noticed his new cologne, I pretended not to. It was sharp, expensive, the kind worn by someone eager to be seen, but not by their wife. He brushed past me in the hallway, smelling of something unfamiliar, something deliberate. He didn't bother explaining. He didn't need to. His silence said more than words could. Later that afternoon, I found him in the living room smiling at his phone. Not the warm smile he gave me when we first married. This one was softer, hidden. The kind meant for someone who made him feel alive in ways I apparently no longer did. He turned the screen away when I walked in. I pretended to look for my keys. The days blurred into each other after that. His distance, my quiet shadowing of him, the steady weight of suspicion pressing into my ribs. I thought I was being discreet watching him, but Ali noticed everything. One evening, as I folded his tiny t-shirts, he crawled into my lap and rested his head against my chest. "Mom," he whispered, "you're sad again." I froze, not because he was wrong, but because he said it with such certainty. Like sadness was a language he was learning too young. I kissed his forehead and told him I was just tired, but he didn't believe me. Children rarely do. That night, long after Ali had fallen asleep beside me, I heard my husband slip outside. No goodbye, no explanation, just the sound of a car door closing and an engine starting in the dark. Something inside me rose, a quiet, trembling resolve. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stepped onto the porch, hiding behind the shadow of the doorway. The driveway glowed faintly under the streetlight, casting a pale halo around him. He checked his phone again, adjusted his shirt, and looked into the mirror with a nervous excitement I hadn't seen in years. Then he drove off. I didn't follow, not yet. Instead, I watched the red taillights draw a thin line across the street, shrinking and shrinking until they slipped into the curve of the night. I stood there long after the engine's hum disappeared, the cold air biting at my skin, my breath fogging in front of me like I was witnessing the ghost of a life I no longer recognized. It was in that stillness that something clicked inside me. All this time, I had been trying to understand him, his distance, his secrecy, the sudden need to be somewhere else. But the truth was simpler and crueler. He had left our marriage long before he walked out of the driveway. And realization has a sound, a quiet breaking one, like the soft sigh of a door you didn't know had been closing for years. I stayed outside until the street grew empty and the world settled. Into the hush of late evening, the porch light flickered above me, casting my shadow long across the steps. My hands were cold, my heart even colder, but clarity real, undeniable. Clarity settled in like the first breath after a long underwater silence. I whispered to the quiet street, to the night itself, maybe even to myself. How long has this life been a lie? The wind didn't answer, but something in me did, and it whispered back, it's time to know the truth. I didn't plan to follow him. Some choices don't come from the mind. They rise from somewhere deeper, the place where fear and instinct meet. That night, the moon was thin, a quiet silver cut across the dark sky. I sat at the edge of my bed, shoes in my hands, heart tapping softly inside my ribs like it didn't want to wake the house. And yet, something had already woken in me, something that refused to stay blind. The hallway felt longer than usual as I walked through it. The air heavy, the silence dense, like it held a secret of its own. Ali slept curled beneath his blanket, his small hand reaching toward the empty space beside him, my space. For a moment, I almost stayed, almost pulled his hand into mine and pretended the world was still the same. But lies don't protect children. Truth does. I tucked the blanket around him and whispered, I'll be right back, though I wasn't sure what right meant anymore. Downstairs, the house breathed in slow creaks. The living room smelled faintly of his cologne, lingering like a confession he didn't bother to hide. His shoes were gone. His jacket, too. Everything pointed toward movement away from us, away from the family we built. I stepped outside, locked the door quietly, and walked toward my car with the kind of calm sadness that felt older than I was. I didn't know where he'd gone. I didn't know what I would find. But I knew I was done pretending. The night was cold enough to make my breath visible, little clouds that drifted upward like unanswered prayers. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to steady my heartbeat before starting the engine, and slowly, quietly, I followed the direction his car had disappeared into earlier. The roads were mostly empty, lit only by scattered streetlights and the occasional passing truck. I drove slower than I needed to, afraid of being seen, afraid of losing him, afraid of what I might discover. Every turn he took earlier, I replayed in my memory. The slight right at the old bakery, the quick acceleration at the crossroads, the way his taillights blinked twice before fading into the curve near the highway. I followed that path like it was a map drawn by disappointment. About 15 minutes in, a scent drifted through my memory, his new cologne mixing with cold night air. It didn't suit him. It suited someone he wanted to impress. A set of fresh tire marks curved into a narrow side street. My chest tightened. I slowed my car and turned without signaling. The headlights catching the edges of old houses, a dim cafe, a closed flower shop. Shadows stretched across the pavement like long fingers pointing anywhere but home. Then I saw it. His car, parked beneath a street lamp, the light glowing over it like an unwanted spotlight. I stopped far enough away that he wouldn't notice, switching off my headlights. My fingers trembled as I pulled my hood over my head. For a long moment, nothing happened. No door opening, no footsteps, just stillness. And then, he appeared. He stepped out of the driver's seat, straightened his shirt, and checked himself in the car window. That same nervous excitement from earlier, there again, blooming across his face like a secret he couldn't hide. I held my breath until it hurt. A figure approached him from the shadows. A woman, hair loose, posture familiar in a way that made something inside me tighten. She reached him before I could blink, and he leaned in to hug her. Not the stiff, polite embrace he gave relatives. A slow one, a knowing one. Her hand touched the side of his face, and he smiled, that rare, soft smile that hadn't been meant for me in months. My world didn't break loudly. It simply folded, like paper bending under too much weight. I lowered myself in my seat, unable to look away and unable to breathe properly. Their shadows tangled beneath the streetlight, two silhouettes shaping a truth I had been refusing to admit. They talked quietly. He laughed once. She touched his shoulder. Everything about their bodies spoke the language of familiarity, of comfort, of possession. I looked at my hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly the skin had gone pale. This was the moment I thought I would cry. But my tears didn't come. Instead, something colder settled in my bones. A realization. This wasn't a new betrayal. This wasn't a sudden shift. This was a path he had been walking for a long time. Long before Ali whispered the truth into my ears. I watched them walk into a small house at the end of the street, the door closing softly behind them. No guilt, no hesitation, No glance back at the life he had built with me. Just certainty. And as the porch light flicked off, leaving the house in complete darkness, a strange calmness washed over me. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, clarity. I now knew exactly what I was dealing with, exactly who he had become, exactly how long he had been living two lives. And for the first time in months, I felt the beginning of something like strength stirring in my chest. I sat in the car long enough for the cold to seep into my clothes. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles only after everyone has made their choices. I stared at the door he disappeared through, memorizing the number, the steps, the crooked porch light, details I knew I would need later. Then I whispered the question that had been growing louder inside me. How long has this life been a lie? This time the night didn't stay silent. Somewhere deep within me a voice answered, long enough, but not anymore. I started the car, not to go home, but to decide what comes next. The afternoon light lay across the living room like a thin sheet of gold, catching dust in the air that drifted slowly, lazily, as if the house itself were tired of holding secrets. I sat on the floor with a stack of old folders spread around me, papers I had pushed aside for years because I trusted a man who told me I didn't need to worry. The pages crackled under my fingertips, stiff with age and neglect. Property deeds, joint accounts, insurance forms with both our names printed side by side, like a promise neither of us had kept. The kettle clicked in the kitchen, but the house stayed listening. I hadn't touched these documents since the early years of our marriage, back when his smile was warm, and my faith in him felt unbreakable. Back then, life was simple. I signed whatever he handed me, believing that love meant trust. And trust meant closing my eyes to the details. But as the papers spread across the carpet, a different truth began to gather itself like storm clouds. Lines highlighted in unfamiliar handwriting. Accounts I had never heard of. A transfer form left unfinished, waiting for only my signature. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't scream or slam doors. It crept softly through me like cold water seeping into cloth. Slow, certain. I felt something inside me harden, not anger, but clarity. Outside, Ali played with his toy car, driving it in small circles, the plastic wheels whispering against the floor. Every few minutes, he looked over his shoulder, checking if I was still there, checking if I was still okay. I offered him a small smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. And he noticed. Children always notice. The lawyer's business card lay beside my knee. I traced the embossed letters with my thumb, feeling the weight of the choice pressing on me, steady and cold. By early evening, I found myself walking into a quiet office that smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. The lawyer was a kind-faced woman with hair tied in a low bun and eyes that seemed to understand more than I said aloud. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. She simply listened. When I finished speaking, she folded her hands gently. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. And then she laid out the path in front of me, one step at a time, like stones across a river. Legal separation, asset protection, emergency freezes on joint accounts, safeguards for Ali. Each word felt like a small, careful stitch closing a wound I didn't realize had been bleeding for years. By the time I left her office, the sun had dipped low, turning the sky a bruised purple. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching a folder filled with everything I needed to protect myself. The evening breeze brushed my hair across my cheek, cool and steady. My heartbeat matched its rhythm, not frantic with fear anymore, but quiet with decision. When I reached home, the porch light was already on, a warm glow for a house that no longer felt like mine. He entered the house minutes after I did, keys jangling against the door like a small alarm. I was still standing in the hallway, coat half open, the folder pressed to my chest. He froze when he saw me, not because he sensed guilt catching up with him, but because the air between us had changed. It was thin, fragile, stretched tight like glass ready to crack at the smallest touch. "Hey," he said carefully, setting his bag down. "You're home early." I nodded. My voice wouldn't come. Ali peeked out from behind the staircase, holding his stuffed bear tight against his chest. His wide eyes flicked between us, reading the tension the way children read weather. My husband stepped closer, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him like an unwelcome shadow. Something inside me shifted. A slow, quiet click, like a lock sliding into place. He picked up a plate from the counter, acting casual, trying to smooth the edges of a moment that couldn't be smoothed. Everything okay? He asked. I looked at him for a long, still moment, at the man I once loved, at the stranger wearing his face. My fingers tightened around the folder, the truth pressed behind my ribs, waiting. Do I confront him now? Do I let the storm break here, in front of Ali? Or do I wait, let him sit in the silence he created, until he feels the weight of what he's done? The question hovered between us, quiet and sharp. Ali took a small step toward me, his little hand reaching for mine as if he sensed the world tilting beneath my feet. I knelt down, smoothing his hair back gently, my eyes never leaving the man who once promised to keep us safe. Behind him, the lamp flickered, just once, the light trembling before steadying again. A small reminder that even brightness can falter. I rose slowly, holding Ali's hand, the folder tucked under my arm like a shield. My husband studied me, confusion deepening into fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but I walked past him without a word, my footsteps soft but certain, choosing silence, choosing strength, choosing a life beyond him. As I reached the doorway to Ali's room, I felt it, the quiet crack of the future opening, fragile and wide. And I whispered to myself, this time, I choose me.